What's going on, guys? Aaron from Top Tier Gaming here, and today I'm coming at you with sort of a video for the new ban list in which I want to talk about a lot of rogue decks that are actually viable this format. You know, the ban list didn't really change much except maybe push Tearlament to even be better than it already was, and maybe help Fluandereeze a little as well. And I just want to go over rogue decks that are actually viable this format, because myself, I like to play more of the off-the-wall decks. Like, a lot of my regional tops are with things like Dinomorphia, you know, Evil Twin back when that was a pure deck, and a bunch of more rogue strategies like Paleozoic. And I really enjoy that type of play, and I know a lot of you guys do as well. So I want to not rank, but just give a few good rogue options this format and explain why they're good and why you might consider playing them, as well as talk about sort of what decks are we trying to beat currently as well. However, before I get into that, I do want to let you guys know, Discord link down below along with all of our other social media links. Also, I'm trying to climb the 10K ladder, so if you do enjoy this video content and you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps me out and what I do here on the channel. But without further ado, let's start looking at potentially really good rogue decks. Of course, the ban list just came out. A lot of testing is going to go into cards like D-Fissure and Macrocosmos and things that can play those. I think Ptolemaeus is also interesting. There's also a really solid chance none of those really get played, and we're in sort of the same format we were already in, minus like Orange Light. So yeah, and of course minus Mystic Mine too, because there's a bunch of rogue decks that used to be playable because of Mystic Mine, like Altergeist and Sky Striker, that now are definitely not as viable. But let's go into talking about what I think the meta is, so that I can more easily explain what the rogue options are. So here's my deck tier list. I'm not going to do a tier list right now. I'm just going to put sort of the first three options here to sort of get what I mean by what's rogue and what's not. So we're going to go down here. We're going to find Tearlaments. Tearlaments are tier 0. Maybe they'll be tier 1 after this ban list if a bunch of people swap to, like, you know, some strategies running D-Fissure and stuff. But yeah, I think at least at the start of this ban list, I'm going to assume Tearlaments is tier 0. I'm going to put Fluandereeze in tier 1. And this is the second best deck in my opinion, at least looking at it from afar. Maybe it's not, because Fluandereeze, they have the problem of bricking, and that always hinders them. But I want to say preemptively, I think this is roughly the second best deck. I think you can also maybe put Sprite here, but initially I kind of want to put like Sprite and its variants almost, like, which could also be Runic Sprite, in tier 2. Like, I feel like they're less good than Flunder at this point, which is weird because I feel like these can also play D-Fissure if the build changes up, and maybe Runic Sprite is worth putting here. Honestly, I think both of these could be considered tier 1, maybe Sprite's tier 2. I feel like Flunder got the bigger boost, but Flunder's also inherently like the worst like deck here compared to Sprite. And then in tier 2, I want to put like Bisted Dragons, or, you know, Bisted variants, decks that run Bisted more often than not Dragon Link Bisted, but there's also Dragon Maids, which I'd say are a little less good. But yeah, the Bisted variants, which could also be branded to an extent, but they get hit harder by Bistials than maybe what they're even hitting. So yeah, this is sort of the decks and how I'd rank them right now. Like, I feel like this is not a very open format. You don't have many options. So with this going in mind, I'm going to talk about decks that I think are viable into this. And the first one I sort of want to talk about is like Runic variants that aren't necessarily Sprite, because Runic, when you look at cards like Runic Fountain, let's just put some cards in here for show, right? Runics, they're all spells, and Dimensional Fissure doesn't really care about that, right? So I feel like with D-Fissure, let's bypass this limit. You can run like a Runic variant, like maybe Magical Musketeers. We can put those in the side deck here. Like a Magical Musket version of Runic isn't really affected by D-Fissure, and you can play a bunch of stun cards with it, and maybe that would be okay. There's also Spellbook, which, you know, I haven't tested personally, but, you know, this is definitely a variant of Runic that could be good. Now, when I say Runic, and if it's not the Sprite version, even though, like, I'm not going to count Runic Sprite as rogue, because I think Runic Sprite is actually still pretty solid. But I think if you shift to a much more stun version of Runic, either of these versions or like pure, and you run like D-Fissures, the deck just got a lot more options for actually dealing with tier than it had before. I mean, this could be like a really solid rogue pick. Now, of course, I haven't personally tested much in this new format, so it's more like theory and what seems good on paper. However, because D-Fissure doesn't hurt Runic at all, I feel like you could play 3 D-Fissure in a Runic deck and have much more options than you had before. Majesty's Fiend is fine. And the thing about D-Fissure specifically is it's actually pretty good going second, especially paired with the Runic cards like Flashing Fire. Like, say you're going against tier, right? Well, D-Fissure plus Flashing Fire actually does something as opposed to just having Flashing Fire. It's not something you really want into tier limits. I think there's potential with Runic. I think Runic is definitely a deck that didn't get touched by this list at all, and in fact got more tools to maybe play more of a stun variation with engines that don't care, because like most of these are spell and trap decks. You don't care if your magical musket monsters go to grave. These are just some options you can play with the Runic cards. There's actually a lot of Runic variants, but the first ones that come to mind are these, which this is pure, and or like the Synchro, or I think Vanity's Fiend can also be played if you really wanted to, but I think Majesty's Fiend is generally better. But yeah, Runic is one of my options for like a good rogue deck this format. The next one I want to talk about is it's actually been doing decently well in some spaces of the game, and like been picking random popularity up. And this is more or less if you're just super tired of playing against tier, but also if birds become super solid, this is pretty good. People have actually been shifting to just very hard stun strategies. Now, I'm not going to say this is like a meta deck or something I would take to a big event, but if you're playing at your local scene, you're tired of losing to tier, and even Fluanderees, these are actually very good cards right here. So we look at a card like Inspector Border, and the reason this is now better is D-Fissures at 3, Macros at 3. Are these cards really going to need to be played at a huge capacity? I don't think so. But D-Fissure for sure I think is extremely solid. You have cards like Inspector Border, you have cards like Thunder King Ryo, and I've seen people actually start shifting to these. Again, how popular it's going to end up being, these stun strategies sometimes don't actually, you know, play out like we want them to, right? But we also have like 3 Metaverse, right? We have 3 Metaverse now. I should be bypassing the limit. Limit reached. Oh, my bad. And we have like Necro Valley that can work with these as well. And you take a look at all these stun cards, right? And something big about even like Metaverse is Metaverse can search Necro Valley or it can search Zombie World now. With 3 Metaverse, you have access to so many floodgates. And let's say, you know, we look back at my tier list, I have, you know, tier limits at tier 0. Fluanderees is probably the next best deck. Dragons are good. Like Metaverse into Zombie World for birds or Necro Valley seems game winning. Inspector Border destroys birds and is really good versus tier limits as well. If they start instant fusion, you know, they start instant fusion, even though I don't even know how far that's really gonna get them. And Thunder King, like, you know how birds work. If you normal summon into the bird board, they're gonna map and summon, and they get their searches and stuff. But both of these monsters on normal summon, birds can't play under. So, I mean, technically there is a hand where birds can play under Thunder King if they, like, have Stree, Toucan, and a Tribute already. It's possible, but more than likely, these are stopping your opponent entirely. D-Fissure is really solid. Now, the thing about this deck is it doesn't really have an engine, but you can definitely play like a more stun version of Grenmaju, right? Like this is something we've seen in the past, like Trap Grenmaju. I actually have deck profiles on the channel of Trap Grenmaju. You have Desires, D-Fissures, you can run Shifters, you can run Gizmek Orochis, which, you know, don't want to be banished by Fissure, but definitely can give you more of an engine and make Grenmaju bigger. You can definitely play like Grenmaju Stun to an extent, which is, again, Trap Gren is something I've played in the past, and it was a really fun deck. I don't know how solid this is going to be going forward, but it's definitely an option. People have definitely been shifting towards a more, like, stun deck because we have so many potential floodgates now, and it's not hurt by Bestials like most of the stun decks we've seen, like Eldritch, which used to be good. Again, this isn't something I would personally play, but I think it's a really solid option. Definitely been seeing people shift more towards that. Another deck, and I think this is a big one, is Exo Sister. I think this one's no surprise at all, so maybe I won't talk about this one too much. In fact, I have like a test build of Exo Sister I can bring up on the screen, because obviously I have played a lot of Exo Sister. I have a first place regional finish with it, and I got first at a large case tournament with it. It's a deck I like a lot, and I think, you know, of course when Tier Limit is the best deck, Exo Sister to some capacity is going to be really solid. And now we have the potential to either play Fissure if we wanted, or since if you're playing Necro Valley, you can Metaverse into Necro Valley. Of course, the problem with that is they're very go first cards. You need go second stuff, but I've always kind of liked Sphere Mode potentially in this deck. When you have Prosperity, Pax, and Martha, there's a good chance you can play past your own Sphere Mode. So, I don't know, it does have a decent go second option potentially. I don't have a lot of testing with this card in this deck specifically. I loved it in Madolche, but Orange Light getting hit kind of changed how I want to play Madolche. But yeah, I think Exo Sister here is like a solid core you can kind of look at. Nothing's really been altered here for the last couple months, but yeah, I mean, D-Fissure works in this deck to an extent. Again, Metaverse is at 3. I say D-Fissure and not Macro a lot, even though Macro's been at 3, but like, in my opinion, it's like, I think D-Fissure is the better card because it can help you go second. There's a lot of decks now where you could potentially just play like D-Fissure and Raigeki in, and like D-Fissure Raigeki just isn't out to the entire tier board, right? Bar Barone. So yeah, I mean, this deck I think is cool. Talking about some other decks, I think rank 4 decks potentially could be good. I'm thinking of some rank 4 decks now. Let me go back to this here. We'll remove some of these from the last video I did where I used this page. Like rank 4 decks right now, you have Teller Knights. Let's talk about Ptolemaeus, right? And what decks can abuse him. So my first thought, where'd he go? Ptolemaeus. So my first thought with this is obviously things like Shark is a really solid rank 4 deck. Let's throw out Buzzsaw. I think this could be a really cool rogue deck. The problem with a lot of these, and especially Ptolemaeus, is these are very, and you know, we'll even put a Teller Knight card here to say, you know, if you want to play Teller Knight, right now in the rogue category, you're almost just trying to do your best. You know, rank 4 decks making Ptolemaeus or Dweller going first is really solid, but I think they struggle going second, which is one of my big issues with them. So talking about these, like I think these could be solid, but yeah, decks that go into Ptolemaeus, especially going first, definitely see, you know, a little bit better now that they have something besides Dweller to make. I think the thing about Ptolemaeus especially is we already have Dweller, so this card is like not super insane in my opinion. But yeah, so let's get one more rogue deck in here. There's definitely a few that I'm missing. There's actually a lot of rogue decks that are semi-viable, right? Like Rika is a deck that isn't, you know, light or dark, so it's not hurt by Bestials, and it's like decent at most things still. It's still decent into a tier board, so like you could say Rika is still a solid deck, which I think it is. It's definitely fallen off as far as play rate. I don't think many people are on Rika anymore. But as a rogue strategy, I think this deck is still extremely solid. It hasn't had anything hit. One thing I will say about this deck is if everyone else is shifting towards, you know, D-Fissure, Macro, this deck does not like those at all. So, you know, do with that what you will. You can definitely play under something like a Shifter to where you can set up at least some form of interruption, like a Princess. Why did I say Princess? That is her name, yeah. Princess and Sheet with your field spell. You can still get there under Fissure and stuff. It's just like a lot less fun, I will say for sure. I kind of want one more rogue deck. I feel like I'm maybe missing one that's like really solid looking through some of the decks I have. I don't think Marincess is something I would really consider right now. I think Naturia is still solid. This is a very, very preliminary build. This was me the first time trying to build the deck. This is sort of what I had. Orange Light's obviously at 1, so that's kind of whack. You can throw in like another Fenrir. I don't think this build is good, so I don't know why I'm adding cards to it. This is, again, very preliminary. But yeah, I think Naturia is solid. Holy moly, why would I be running these? In fact, I don't even know if you run Orange Light anymore. I'd probably still run these. I mean, tier limits are still milling your stuff. I think a problem with a lot of these rogue decks as well is it's really hard to find one that beats both tier and Fluanderies, which is another thing. Looking at this format from afar, I don't think I like that much. Is the fact that, yeah, like, all these decks that I've shown, for the most part, they have a fine time going into a tier board or making something against a tier board. but they just struggle immensely versus Flunder. It's really hard to find something that beats both. Now, going back to like Trap, Gren Maju and stuff, cards like Skill Drain seem pretty solid. Let's go back here. I'm just all messed up with this thing. I need to save this as like a, there we go, blank template. I think cards like Skill Drain are good right now because if you pair them with like a really oppressive other Floodgate, it's solid. Zombie World's really solid against a lot of decks right now, but I don't think I'd want to be playing zombies when, besides playing against Tier where this card's like okay, everything else is trying to counter Tier. So you have everyone running Shifter, Defissure, potentially, right? They could be playing these cards. Maybe they're not, maybe they are. They probably have them at their side at the very least. So you can't play something like actual zombies that need their graveyard, despite this card being super solid. But yeah, I guess that's going to wrap it up for me. I think I've actually rambled on for quite a long time, despite feeling like I didn't show that many decks. But let me know down in the comments below what your favorite Rogue decks going into the next format are. Again, Rogue is like almost slim pickings at this point because the other decks are just so powerful. Madolche is definitely still solid. I know a lot of people want to ask me about that because I've been a big advocate of Madolche. Orange Light going to 1 has made me rethink the deck entirely because that's actually one of the best interactions is Chateau, Glass Souffle, Orange Light. So I don't know if I want to put Madolche here right now, even though I really loved the deck before. Yeah, I'm just not so certain on Madolche. That needs more testing. But I hope you guys enjoyed, you know, like, again, a lot of decks can go here. Like, even talking about things like Crystal Beast can go here because I know I'm like ending the video and I'm still showing stuff, so that's kind of whack. But yeah, even things like Crystal Beast can be solid because they can play Necro Valley, Baguska, things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of Rogue options is what I'm trying to say, and of course I didn't cover all of them. Maybe if you guys wanted to see a Rogue tier list, well, I wouldn't do that because I'm going to do a best deck post-Banlist tier list eventually. If you guys want to see that, let me know if you want to see that down below. But yeah, with all that being said, this has been Aaron from Top Tier Gaming. Let me know down below in the comments what your favorite Rogue deck this format, what you're thinking about playing. And yeah, catch you guys later. Bye, YouTube.